Now, Mr. and Mrs. Hill, for your story. I believe it began on the night of the 19th of September, 1961, as you were driving home from a vacation in Canada, and something happened near Lancaster, New Hampshire. Which one of you was the first to see this something happen?
Betty was the first one.
Yes.
Betty, could you start the story then?
Yes. We were driving along on Route 3, and it was a very clear night, and the moon was very almost full and very bright. And the sky was very clear. We could see the stars easily. But suddenly, right near the moon, I noticed a new star, which was much larger and brighter than the other stars in the sky. And I called Barney's attention to this. Then suddenly, we noticed it started to move. And it went across the face of the moon. We stopped the car and got out to look at this, because we thought it was a satellite. And while we were observing it, it made a turn and started to come in our direction. And at this point, we changed our minds, thinking that it must be a plane. We were driving along, and as it came in closer, I began to realize that it was not a satellite or a plane, that it was something that I had never seen before. Now, this was based on its maneuverability, the way it was flying. It was had a very erratic flight in the sky, and as it came in closer to us, it was sort of riding along on the ridge of the mountains. And then when we got in the area of Indian Head, it suddenly swung out over the highway in front of our car. At this time, I could see a row of windows around the edge and a red light on each side. And it was at this point that Barney stopped the car, and he decided to get out to get a good look at it and to identify it.
So I got out of the car and took the pair of binoculars, 7x50 crescent binoculars, and stepped away. And as I raised the binoculars, looking over the roof of the car from my position on the ground, the object shifted across the highway, where it now, in making the shift, it also had a descent motion that brought it to what I roughly estimated as about 100 feet in the air. And then I began walking across the highway into the field. I walked quite a distance in the field, and I saw what I thought were figures standing by this huge plate glass looking back at me. I couldn't believe it. I dashed back to the car screaming to Betty that, oh my gosh, I said, it's going to capture us, is what I said. There was a series of beeps, and then later there was another series of beeps. Betty asked me if I now believed in flying saucers, and I told her, don't be ridiculous, of course not. We continued then to proceed on to Portsmouth, and we arrived. We both felt very uncomfortable and clean. I don't think I mentioned to Betty how I felt, but I felt clammy, as if I had fallen into something very, very filthy.
What time did you come home? I understand there was a time factor that you were surprised that you had come home so late.
Well, actually, at the time, no, I wasn't surprised that we had arrived home later than really what we would have expected, because we didn't put any particular importance on our arrival time, except that we knew it was around 4:30. We should have arrived home at 4 hours. We arrived home in about 5.5 to 6 hours.
What were these objects on the back of your car that bothered you so much?
Well, when I went out to look at the car, to check it with the compass, as this physicist had suggested, I found some round, highly polished spots on the trunk of the car. When I put the compass near them, it just reacted erratically. And
spun around?
Yes. And then when I moved it away, the compass reacted normally.
We had been asked if others had seen these spots, and there are. There was a sergeant living in our apartment building at the time. He and his wife, they knew we had been on vacation, so they came down, and Betty told them she had gone out, and she was quite upset about what she had seen, and was trying to get me to go out, and I wouldn't, so they went out and took a look, and they came in quite excited, insisting that I go out and look on the trunk of Betty's car. So when I went out, I also, too, saw these large shiny spots. And I didn't put any, well, it wasn't important. They were just shiny spots. I didn't know how they got there, but I didn't try to even understand how they were there.
What next?
During the same period of time, well, about 10 days after the sighting itself, I had a series of dreams that lasted for about 5 nights. And these were somewhat upsetting and puzzling to me. At first, I thought of them only as bad dreams. But then when the scientists noticed that there was this period of time, then I began to wonder if my dreams might have been my way of trying to recall what had happened.
What could you tell us now about what was in those dreams?
Well, the dreams, well, briefly, in my dreams, we were driving along. We were stopped by a group of men on the highway, taken out of the car, taken aboard the UFO, underwent physical examination, and then were released. These were the dreams that I had.
How long after your mysterious experience in Lancaster in the mountains did you go to see Dr. Simon?
Well, this would have been in the latter part of 1963. The sighting was in September 1961. Mm-hmm. And so I was...
More than 2 years,
yes,
perhaps.
Yes.
Revealed to you. What story did you learn about your experience under hypnosis?
Well, there were the beeping sounds, and then I apparently went into some kind of daze, some kind of condition like this. And we're driving along, and Barney suddenly made a sharp left-hand turn off the highway, and we went around a curve, and there was a group of men standing in the highway. And under hypnosis, my first thought was, there must be an automobile accident. And then the car motor died, and Barney was trying to start the car, and he wasn't able to, and these men were coming closer, and they divided, and at this moment, I panicked. I became very frightened. I tried to open the car door, thinking I would get out, run and hide in the woods until they were gone. And just as I opened the door, they stepped over where I was.
Could you remember under hypnosis what these men looked like?
Not at that moment.
Mm-hmm. Well, go ahead.
Then they took me out of the car, and I went into sort of another deeper daze of some sort.
Kind of a trance.
Yes. And then I was more or less pulled myself out of this, or at least partially. And I found myself walking in the woods with a man on each side of me, and some in front, some behind me. And then in back of me was Barney, and he was like sleepwalking. And there were these two men more or less holding him up. We walked through this long path in the woods until we came to the craft that was sitting on the ground. We went up the ramp, and...
I might add, the ramp was never mentioned in Betty's dreams, but both seemed to share the idea that we had been going up a ramp.
It was not in Betty's dreams,
no.
But it was the word that came out under hypnosis.
Yes, that's correct.
Yes, so we went up the ramp into this corridor that curved, and they took me into the first room, and they took Barney into the second room. And while I was in there, they did what we call a fairly simple physical examination.
Could you describe?
The first thing they did was they examined my arm. Apparently, they were looking at my skin, and they seemed to be making a lot of comments among themselves, as if they were quite excited about this. And they brought over what I called, I've never seen one, so I don't know, but I call it a microscope with a camera attached. Then after that, they took hair samples on my fingernails. They checked my eyes, hair, my ears, nose, and things like this. And they looked over my hands and my feet, particularly my feet, quite thoroughly. Then they said they were going to test my nervous system. And they brought over some kind of a machine, which they touched.
Were you fully dressed?
No. They took off my dress and my shoes. And then during this, what they call the checking of my nervous system, I had a slip on. And they pulled my slip off and did this tester. And then the next one was the examiner had a needle. And I became aware that he was going to...
Jab you?
Yes, I didn't know if it was an injection or what it was. And I begged them not to use the needle because it would hurt. and he started to insert it into my navel.
A long needle?
It was a long needle. I don't know how.
This long?
It was, I think under hypnosis, I said 4 to 6 inches.
Mm-hmm.
But I became badly frightened when I saw the needle. And then when I found they were trying to put it into my navel, I became very frightened, and I begged them not to do it. And the leader said it wouldn't hurt. And they started to put it in, and it did.
Why were they doing it?
Well, he said it was a pregnancy test. And I said, well, it was no pregnancy test here. And when they seemed to be very surprised that I had any pain from this. And the leader put his hand out over my eyes, and the pain went away, but they stopped the test.
There was one man whom you called the leader?
There was one I called the leader and one I called the examiner.
What language did you speak to them in?
I spoke in English. And I don't know what language they spoke in, but I understood them in English.
By word or sound or thought transference? Or...
I don't know.
You don't know?
No, but under hypnosis, it seemed to me I actually heard sounds.
Now,
although I cannot say it was English.
What happened when the examination was finished?
Well, then I was standing there waiting to go back to the car, because all during this time they reassured us that as soon as the tests were over with, we'd go back to the car. And so I was standing there waiting, and they said that Barney's examination was taking longer, and that I would have to wait for him. And then there was all this excitement, and this man came into the room and started tugging at my teeth. And I questioned them about this, and this is when they showed their surprise that Barney's teeth were removable and mine were not.
What were your experiences while Betty was in the room being examined by these man-like beings?
And I'd like to emphasize before I go into that is that this was brought out under hypnosis because I am still a bit reluctant in this area.
And I think it is important to reemphasize that the story you've just told is one that you were not consciously aware of,
Never had.
but which was drawn out of you by your psychiatrist, Dr. Ben Simon,
yes,
under hypnosis.
Yes. Yeah. And it seemed as if I was carried up the ramp. My feet were banging against the ground as these small men I described came up to me and carried me from the car and through the woods and up this ramp and into this room where I opened my eyes. I saw a table. Betty described the table as being adequate for her to lie on, the room where she was in. And at this time, I do not know where Betty is. And apparently, I am more concerned of my own welfare to be concerned about Betty. But the table that I described was small, and obviously the difference in our heights could be the answer.
Well, how tall were these men?
I estimate, I said they were about as tall as Betty, but this would mean that they
were 5'1"?
About 4.5 to 5 feet.
I'm 5 feet.
5 feet.
Yes, and I'm 5'8". Mm-hmm. So that the 3 inches difference was quite a difference. Mm-hmm. And I said that the table was too small. Where I, too, was given an examination, I'm very conscious about my teeth. I was very upset about... I only got as far as saying something went into my mouth, and I did not bother to tell the doctor, and he did not press this as to what was happening, but I can only think now that this would have been when my teeth would have been extracted. And
pulled out.
Pulled out. Yeah, I should have said pulled out because they're dentures. Yes, and so they weren't extracted, they had been. But I go on the point, explain that the kind of examination that I had been given is a scraping of the skin, and I had been turned over. They were interested in body openings, and a cup-like object was placed against my genitals. And I was reluctant to talk about that until Mr. Fuller was able to word it for me by saying lower abdomen. And this would have been the extent of the examination.
What do you believe now, Bunny?
Oh, I ask Betty first.
All right, Betty.
I believe we were really captured. I mean, if we were not captured, there was no face to the problem of what happened during these 2 hours of amnesia.
Well, this is what I'm forced, in a sense, to believe that something happened that night. I can't say definite as to what definitely happened, but apparently if the hypnosis which we were led to believe would be the means of opening up the amnesia, if this is not the facts, then what are the facts?
It's sort of like a glow on the outside.
The Del Duca case was investigated by Dr. Richard Sigismund, a social psychologist in Boulder, Colorado. Their story begins late one night while driving down a lonely stretch of highway on their way home from a trip with their 4-month-old son. All they can remember is seeing 4 UFOs. Only under deep hypnosis do they begin to fill in the lost hours.
4, 5, sleep.
Joe and Carole are each hypnotized separately, but relate similar stories.
Pulling into the woods.
You're pulling into where?
The woods.
What are you doing there?
We're going to the spaceship.
Going to a what?
The
Carole?
spaceship.
Tell me what you're doing then.
Going into the room.
It's a bright room. It's a bright room. What are you doing in this room, Joe?
Just laying there.
In these rooms, Joe and Carole talk about undergoing some kind of physical examination.
They're looking at my feet.
They're looking at your feet, you said?
Yes. It's hurting me.
What'd you say, Carole? It's all right to tell me, Carole.
They're hurting my ankle.
They're doing what?
They pulled on my ankle. It feels like they broke it.
There's people.
Will you describe these people to me, Joe? Tell me what you see. Tell me what they're doing, if anything.
They got little ribs all up and down. They're real skinny at the waist, but they have a big chest.
It's clear that Joe and Carole are reliving an intensely emotional experience, especially Joe, who describes an unusual meeting with one of the entities.
He just pulled me out.
Pulled you out of what, Joe?
Out of my body. I'm one, but I'm two. He's so nice. He's warm. He likes me.
The stories on every significant, in fact, minor details, they match. Even though each individual had distinctly different type of experience which they relived under the hypnosis. Nonetheless, if they were describing the shape of the so-called craft, or they're describing the suits of the entities, it all dovetailed to a minute degree. It would be a great difficulty if individuals sought to perpetrate a hoax to maintain it under deep hypnosis.
An engaged couple on a family vacation steal away for a quiet drive through the north woods of Wisconsin. There's something strange about that ride that they can't figure out yet. Back at the cabin, the couple stroll down to the lake. The night is clear, there's a bright star, but then it moves and they realize this is no star.
There was one star-like object. It was a little bit brighter than a star, kind of an orangey color that seemed to stand out from the others a bit. Really didn't think anything of it at the time, but my focus kept going back and forth to that particular object. And after a while, I noticed some odd things about it.
This bright orange star that was along the horizon of the trees on the other side of the lake zipped right to the top of our heads, and we looked up.
The stargazing couple were Karen Klinger and Dennis Murawska, and what they saw would haunt them for more than 20 years.
I think the best way I could describe the flight is like that of a dragonfly. It was just, it would zip here, stop, zip here, stop, zip, 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 zip really fast. And I'm like, what are we watching? You know, I was fascinated by it. I didn't want to stop looking at it. I was just glued to it. And we finally started calling my folks down from the cabin so they could watch. And my mother was a little scared.
The whole family got down to the lake in time to see the single light split into 3, then rejoin as one. It was a fascinating spectacle that drove one family member to try something illogical.
Denny's sister's boyfriend went into the house and got a large beam flashlight and flashed at the UFOs 3 times. Suddenly, they just completely disappeared. And about maybe a couple of seconds later, they flashed back at us the same amount of times as we had flashed at it.
After a few minutes of this strange communication, everyone reached the same impossible conclusion.
By this time, we knew we were watching something that we had no explanation for. It was really strange and definitely appeared to be intelligently controlled.
The bizarre communication went on for half an hour. Then, in less than the blink of an eye, the UFO was gone. The encounter had a profound effect, but Karen and Dennis wouldn't know just how profound for another 2 decades. By then, they had married, had a son, and an acrimonious divorce. In fact, in 1994, they were barely speaking when Dennis and Karen met to exchange custody of their son.
Well, this particular evening, he got out of the car probably for the first time that he'd talked to me face-to-face in a year. And he knocks on the window of the car. And the first thing that comes out of his mouth was, "Have you ever considered hypnosis?" And I said to him, I said, "You saw that program."
The program was sightings, and our report on the abduction experience of 4 men camping in the Allagash wilderness of northern Maine. They too had seen a UFO in the sky. Like Karen and Dennis, they had used a flashlight to signal the spacecraft, and most importantly of all, the Allagash 4 had missing time. A roaring fire they had left just minutes before was now nearly out. Karen and Dennis, divorced and barely speaking, watched the report in different homes, but had the same revelation at the same moment. They too had had missing time.
Both Karen and I remembered the night of this incident that as we were driving around the lake, which is exactly a 4-mile radius, doesn't take very long to cover it all, that at one point we looked up and the moon was directly in line with the rearview mirror of the car. And by the time we got back to the lake, which shouldn't have been very long, the moon was setting.
It never occurred to me until that moment that there could possibly be some missing time involved. I felt sick. I literally felt nauseated at the thought of it.
But what happened during that missing time? Dennis asked Karen if she would consider hypnotherapy as a way to find the answer.
I think that the nature of a repressed memory is that there is no conscious access to this memory. It's not something that somebody remembers once or occasionally and then sticks back in a locked vault someplace in their mind.
Dr. David Clayton agreed to hypnotize Karen. He had no faith in the abduction experience, but as he worked with Karen, he realized that she was not unlike other patients who he'd seen relive past trauma under hypnosis.
Karen was recalling a very intense white light that approached the vehicle that she and her former husband were in at the time. And when this white light approached the side of the vehicle, it was so intense, I think Karen, at that point, felt that she had fainted.
Under Dr. Clayton's watchful eye, Karen revealed traumatic contact with extraterrestrial beings, something Dennis couldn't or wouldn't recall. But their descriptions of the craft were nearly identical.
We compared notes later. They corroborated very closely with some of the points that Karen had brought up under hers. We both got these images of a grid-like pattern, almost a primitive type structure, almost like a dirigible or something.
Independently, Karen and Dennis insisted that the purpose of the abduction was not to hurt them, but to help all humankind. They each felt compelled to deliver the same message. The fate of Earth is intertwined with alien worlds throughout the cosmos, and Earthlings are not doing a good job of taking care of our part of the universe. It's a message that abduction support group leader Mary Kerfoot hears a lot.
As far as the phenomenon in general, some people's experiences can truly be described as abductions. They are taken kicking and screaming, struggling against their will. Others evolve over time as they understand what is happening to come very cooperatively and become associated with the beings that they're working with in a participatory role.
The Chicago Center for Encounters support group was formed in 1993, so abductees and experiencers would know that they are not alone.
It's enormously exciting for the members of our support group to compare experiences, because as soon as you find someone who has some aspect that is similar or exactly like yours, you feel much more validated.
At first, abductees were pariahs, oddballs, inventing a new mythology. But after 3 decades, the phenomenon is not going away because, abductees insist, alien contact is a reality.
If you feel that this has happened to you, by all means, do whatever it takes to uncover the information, because it's worth the risk.
I'm sentimental, what's the use in trying not to fall?
For New York entertainers Elliot and Debra Novak, rehearsals are routine. Yet nothing could have prepared them for that long night 13 years ago, when they say they were abducted by a UFO. They are just now coming to terms with the full range of their experiences.
I remember thinking to myself, God, if they want to take us, let's go with them.
I have a fond memory of it is because it felt like a letdown when it was over. Not like I was relieved when it was over. I felt like I wanted it to go on longer, and here I was back, in New York.
Television producer, writer, and entertainer Elliot Novak and his then-fiancée performer Debra Studer finished their show at Grossinger's Resort Hotel in the Catskill Mountains at 11 o'clock on August 23, 1984. Within minutes, they had packed their bags and props and were on their way back to New York City via Route 17 South, a trip that would ordinarily take them about 2 hours. Tonight, however, things didn't work as usual. Elliot looked up and saw a set of mysterious blinking lights. He pointed them out to Debra, and she pulled over. The lights stopped blinking and began to move toward them. Only then did they see 3 separate lights located on the corners of a giant triangle, a dark metallic object. This illustration is Elliot's interpretation of what they saw.
It was so large that you couldn't see any sky if you looked left or right or back. It filled your entire line of vision and peripheral vision.
It was like the size of a football field. That's the best way I could describe it.
The object moved over the car without making a sound and suddenly stopped, bathing them with an intense bluish-white light.
I remember at one point seeing a flash of light and then nothing.
I do remember the feeling of butterflies in my stomach and as if you were in a small plane that was going up and down and changing altitude.
The next thing they remember, the object was gone. The passenger door was open and Elliot's legs were hanging out. But there was something even more puzzling.
I raised myself up and closed my pants up. I had no idea what was going on, why my pants were down, what I was doing with my legs out of the car, why Debbie didn't say to me, "What are you doing with your legs out of the car with your pants down?" Nothing. We said nothing to each other. We just drove on.
They arrived back in New York City about an hour and a half later than usual. In the morning, Elliot woke up feeling a strange soreness in his groin.
The aftermath the next morning of being sore down there and having bruising on my thighs and on my legs and on my groin, and I urinated blood that morning for the only time in my life, the only time this ever happened to me.
Oddly enough, an article in the New York Times the next day provided details of similar UFO sightings reported over a period of months by thousands of residents in the Hudson Valley. Accounts of a gigantic triangle with lights in the summer skies. Science educator and author Philip Imbrogno says he was one of those who saw the 3-cornered spacecraft. He has gathered more than 7,000 reports of related sightings in the area. Among these were more than 175 reports of abductions.
Number of cases that offer good data. We're talking about people who are looking for publicity, people who have passed psychological testing and so on. The number in the Hudson Valley is still staggering, well over 175.
I didn't know anything about abduction. I didn't know anything about spaceships, so it wasn't until after it was over did I really begin to think that I was taken aboard an alien spacecraft.
In 1984, the Novaks were certain of the UFO sighting near Grossinger's in the Catskills. But it wasn't until February 1997, 13 years later, that they would consider the possibility they might have been among those abducted in the Hudson Valley. It all started when a friend gave Debra a copy of Missing Time, written by UFO researcher Bud Hopkins.
I opened it up and I couldn't put it down. I stayed up all night and read it. And I saw many similarities to things that had happened in my life. Not only the Grossinger experience, but other experiences in my life as well.
Hopkins, who has investigated more than 600 abduction reports since 1975, agreed to help them, suggesting hypnosis as a way of recovering experiences they may have repressed.
When you work with somebody who's having these experiences or has had them over a number of years, you're aware that there's a core series of experiences, many of which they might not be consciously aware of.
Bud Hopkins, while not a therapist, consults with psychologists and psychiatrists and has lectured to hundreds of mental health professionals who want to find out how to look into abduction experiences. Hopkins served a 7-year apprenticeship as a hypnotist before working on his own with people who believe they might have been abducted. In February of 1997, Elliot Novak underwent hypnosis in Bud Hopkins' office. The videotape from that session shows Elliot as he remembers finding himself in a cold room on a metal table with shadowy figures nearby.
Is there any part of your body where you feel that tingling more intensely than any other part, or is it all over?
It's just in my groin, like it's falling asleep.
I could see my legs up because I could see the tops of my knees, but I had no feeling there whatsoever. But the fellow on the right was doing something down there because I could see him. I could see his head right here. I just can't imagine that they would and perform these. I mean, how often do you have to do that?
During her own hypnosis, Debra reported that when the UFO passed over the car, she turned to Elliot, but he was gone. She had apparently been left behind. After their hypnosis sessions, Debra and Elliot compared their newfound recollections.
You didn't see me next to you. Where did you see me anywhere?
No.
Outside?
No. My next recollection was that I pulled back onto the road, and he was there again.
Debra not only recalled the 1984 UFO sighting, she also remembered a night in 1982 when she recalled lying in bed terrified while a strange light filled the room. This time it was she and not Elliot who was taken. She recounted chilling details of what she says occurred aboard the alien craft.
What's your abdomen? Do you feel something different there? What do you feel at the abdomen? It's different. Describe it to me. Happened a long time ago. It's going to be okay. I'll put my hand back on your forehead. My hand's coming back, calming down, feeling better. You've got what? Just tell me very clearly.
A needle.
A needle? Uh-huh. Where's the needle? Feel my hand on your forehead. Soothing. Calming.
It's in me. It's in... Oh, God.
Anybody can do hypnosis on anybody else, as long as that person wants to be hypnotized. The problem is that people can fabulate. They say things that are not true. Their memory is faulty, even under the best of circumstances.
Bud Hopkins argues that the memories of abductees are deliberately wiped out or suppressed by the aliens during an abduction experience, and that hypnosis has been extremely effective when conducted carefully.
This isn't something like a self-repression of memory that might go on with somebody who's had something terribly traumatic and doesn't remember it, which we do know happens. This is a thing which seems to have been imposed from the outside.
Hopkins says he uses hypnosis to counteract a similar state induced by the aliens. He recovers memories he believes the aliens have suppressed. Journalist C.D.B. Bryan, who has written a book about abductions, does not believe that abductions are real, but he has watched Hopkins hypnotize 2 other abductees and defends him.
I've watched him try to lead them, to demonstrate to me, for example, that you cannot make them say something that they don't want to say. And I think the great criticism against hypnosis is that they are trying to please the hypnotizer or they're simply making things up. I didn't see this happen.
As UFO skeptics and researchers debate possible explanations for the abduction phenomena, Elliot offers his own.
Eventually, everyone is going to be made aware of this. It's happening with too much regularity. It's happening to people who never believed that anything like that could happen to them. It's beyond the realm of the lunatic fringe reporting these things only. And you know, you can't prove it to people who don't believe. You just have to wait, and that's human nature. You know, until it jumps up and bites you on the nose, you're not going to believe.